Welcome to the Library of Alexandra, a place for curious minds and complicated books, made a little easier to understand. Because the truth is, we all imagine ourselves reading more, learning more, becoming more. But life doesn't always give us the time. So here, we take those dense, intimidating books and turn them into something you can actually absorb and reflect on. If you'd like to keep exploring with me, don't forget to like and subscribe. Then tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Think of it as signing the library guest book, and if you know someone who keeps buying books they never finish, send them this video. The library is calling.
Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
We are really thrilled you are joining us today. You know, it's a rare experience to pick up a text that fundamentally threatens the way you perceive the physical world.
Absolutely.
And not through abstract philosophical posturing, right? But through calm, meticulously documented accounts of the impossible. So today, our mission is to journey into the heart of one such text. We are exploring the original 1946 edition of Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda.
And it is essential to emphasize right off the bat that we are analyzing this specific 1946 verbatim reprint, the one published by Crystal Clarity Publishers.
Right.
We aren't just looking at a spiritual memoir here. We are examining a cultural artifact that arguably detonated a spiritual revolution in the West. I mean, when this book arrived in post-war America, it presented a radically different paradigm of reality to an audience that was entirely steeped in material determinism.
Yeah, totally.
And to anchor this staggering paradigm shift, the book relies heavily on its preface by W.Y. Evans Wentz. As an Oxford scholar and a globally recognized authority on Eastern religion, Evans Wentz acts as an independent Western eyewitness. He traveled extensively, met these Indian sages, and spent significant time with Yogananda's own guru, Sri Yukteswar. By writing that preface, an Oxford academic effectively put his entire professional reputation on the line to vouch for the sheer reality of the figures and phenomena we are about to explore.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because the premise of the source material is, frankly, astonishing. We are going to be examining firsthand eyewitness accounts of bilocation,
Yeah.
the act of a human body existing in two geographic locations simultaneously. We will look at accounts of human levitation. We're going to dig into the literal materialization of physical objects, from ancient jewelry to fresh fruit pulled directly out of thin air. We're even looking at historical accounts of bare-handed, bare-knuckled tiger fighting.
Wild.
It reads like the highest form of mystical fantasy, yet it is presented with the dry earnestness of a laboratory report.
Exactly. And our approach today is not to demand that you blindly accept these accounts as literal truth. Our goal is to examine these narratives exactly as they are reported in the text, and to excavate the profound, highly structured philosophy of mind over matter that connects every single one of them. Because behind every so-called miracle in this deep dive is a rigorously defined, almost mechanical system of spiritual physics.
So we have a simple request for you as you listen today. Take your modern hyper-rational biases, put them in a box, and slide them under the table for the next hour. Step into a framework where the rigid boundaries of physics and the accepted limits of human potential are entirely up for debate.
I love it.
We have to start at the foundation of this worldview, which centers on the sheer power of the spoken word and the concentrated mind. To understand the author, who was born Mukunda Ghosh, we have to look closely at his parents. They came from a high-ranking family, and his father was a high-level executive in the Bengal Nagpur Railway. But the psychological dynamic between the parents is what really sets the stage. You have a father who is deeply loving, but rigorously strict.
A brilliant mathematician, really.
Yes, a mind that operates on flawless logic and budget balancing. Contrasted with him is the mother, who the text describes as a queen of hearts. She's fiercely tender and driven by an almost reckless sense of charity.
And the text provides a brilliant microcosm of their dynamic through a specific disagreement over money. It's an anecdote that establishes the philosophical line for the entire family. A poor woman comes to the house asking for help, and the mother wishes to give her 10 rupees. The father immediately pushes back, arguing that 1 rupee is an adequate charitable gift. He grounds his argument in his own childhood trauma of poverty.
Right, he had it rough.
Oh, incredibly rough. He recalls how his own father died suddenly, leaving the family destitute. He describes walking miles to school on an empty stomach, subsisting on a single small banana, and intensely remembering a wealthy judge who once coldly refused him a loan of a single rupee. His logical conclusion is simply that even a rupee is important.
But the mother's counter-argument is just devastatingly sharp. She listens to his trauma and says something like, "Do you want this woman also to remember painfully your refusal of 10 rupees, which she needs urgently?"
It's brilliant emotional jujitsu.
It completely dismantles his logic by using his own empathy against his frugality. He folds immediately and hands over the 10 rupees. But reading further, it becomes clear that the father's strictness with money wasn't born out of simple stinginess. He possessed a profound, almost extreme detachment from material wealth.
That detachment becomes undeniable later in his life. Long after he retires, an English accountant auditing the railway company's books discovers something baffling. The father had simply never claimed his overdue bonuses.
Just left the money sitting there.
Exactly. He had been doing the work of 3 men for years and left behind 125,000 rupees. To put that in perspective, that was roughly $41,250 at the time, which was an absolute fortune. When his family confronts him about this massive uncollected sum, his response is a masterclass in yogic stoicism. He essentially tells them that the entire pursuit of even-mindedness requires a mind that is neither elated by material profit nor depressed by material loss. He reminds them that we arrive in this world penniless and we depart without a single rupee.
That kind of impenetrable stoicism doesn't just spontaneously generate in a busy railway executive. It was directly cultivated by their family guru, Lahiri Mahasaya. The story of how the father first encountered this guru is our first real plunge into the reality-bending nature of this text. The father had a subordinate at the railway office named Abhinash, who asked for a week's leave to travel to Benares to visit Lahiri Mahasaya. The father's initial reaction is pure corporate skepticism.
Yeah, he scoffs at him.
He totally scoffs at Abhinash, warns him against becoming a religious fanatic, and tells him to concentrate on his office work if he ever wants to advance his career.
It is a totally mundane, relatable office interaction. But what happens next shatters the father's material worldview. Later that same afternoon, the father is walking home and spots Abhinash. They're walking near a tranquil, secluded field. The late afternoon sun is shining, the wild grass is rippling in the wind, and suddenly, right there in the middle of the field, just a few yards away, the physical form of Lahiri Mahasaya materializes out of thin air.
Just out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere. The guru doesn't just appear. He speaks directly to the father, addressing him by name, saying, "Phagabadi, you are too hard on your employee." And then, as quickly as he appeared, he vanishes back into the ether.
The psychological impact of that moment on a mathematically minded executive must have been cataclysmic. He is completely stupefied. He goes straight to Abhinash, grants him his leave, and immediately says, "Not only do I give you leave, but I give myself leave to start for Benares tomorrow."
Yeah, he was completely won over in a second.
He is so overwhelmed by the sheer undeniable physics of a master who can materialize a physical body at will, purely to intercede for a lowly office clerk, that he takes his wife and they both become lifelong disciples of Lahiri Mahasaya.
And becoming a disciple meant being initiated into a specific practice called Kriya Yoga. It is vital to unpack what this actually means in the context of the source material, because we often conflate the word yoga with physical stretching or gymnastics in the West. Kriya Yoga is described in the text as an ancient, highly advanced psychophysiological engine. It is a mathematical method of accelerating human evolution.
The premise being that you are circulating energy, right?
Exactly. By consciously circulating life force, or prana, up and down the cerebrospinal axis, the yogi effectively alters the subtle architecture of the brain and nervous system. The text claims that 1/2 minute of this specific energetic circulation equals 1 year of natural spiritual evolution. It is portrayed not as a belief system, but as an empirical internal science designed to burn off karmic limitations and allow the practitioner to realize their unity with the infinite universe. Lahiri Mahasaya's historical significance is that he was the master tasked with bringing this hidden technique back into the open for the modern age.
Which makes Lahiri Mahasaya a fascinating figure, because despite reintroducing this science to the masses, he was incredibly elusive on a physical level. The text details a famous incident involving a photographer, Gangadhar Babu, who was absolutely determined to capture an image of the guru. Lahiri Mahasaya generally refused to be photographed, but Gangadhar Babu decides to try anyway.
As people do.
As people do, yeah. He sets up his camera equipment with meticulous care, ensuring the lighting and exposure are perfect, and takes 12 separate exposures of the master sitting on a wooden bench. When he goes to his darkroom to develop the glass plates, he finds something inexplicable. Every single plate shows the wooden bench clearly. Every plate shows the screen behind the bench perfectly. But the space where the guru's body should be is entirely blank. The camera simply did not register his physical form.
The photographer is, naturally, devastated and confused. He returns to the guru in tears, and Lahiri Mahasayya's response gets to the very core of this philosophy. He asks the photographer, "I'm spirit. Can your camera reflect the omnipresent invisible?" It is a profound philosophical provocation. The implication is that a highly realized master does not view their physical body as a fixed, dense object governed by external laws of light and optics. The body is viewed as a projection of consciousness. If that consciousness does not explicitly consent to interact with the silver emulsion on a photographic plate, the light simply will not record it. The master eventually takes pity on the man and consciously allows his form to be captured in one single photograph, which became the iconic image used throughout the book.
This is the environment young Mukunda is born into. He is raised in a household where the manipulation of matter through consciousness is treated as an established, localized fact. And the text shows Mukunda experimenting with this early on. I found the stories of his childhood particularly striking because they show him testing these boundaries in very different ways. For example, there was a terrifying incident where he contracts Asiatic cholera.
Asiatic cholera in India at that time was essentially a death sentence. The text notes that the doctors had completely given up on him. He is frail, dying, and too weak to even move. His mother, operating from her fierce devotion, instructs him to look at the photograph of Lahiri Mahasaya hanging on the wall and to bow to him mentally, since his physical body is paralyzed by the disease.
Mukunda follows her instruction. He fixes his gaze on the photograph and reports seeing a blinding light suddenly envelop his body and fill the entire room. In that instant, the fatal symptoms of the cholera vanish. His healing is immediate and complete.
That narrative establishes the positive, life-saving application of this focused mental energy. But the text doesn't shy away from showing the darker, more volatile side of this power in the hands of an undisciplined child. This brings us to the infamous Boyle incident, which operates almost as a cautionary tale within the early chapters.
This incident is fascinatingly petty, which makes it feel so authentic. Mukunda and his older sister Uma are sitting outside. Uma has a painful boil on her leg and is applying a specific ointment to it. Mukunda, acting like a typical annoying younger brother, takes some of her ointment and smears it on his own perfectly healthy arm. When Uma demands to know what he's doing, he casually remarks, "I feel I'm going to have a boil tomorrow. I'm testing your ointment." Uma, unsurprisingly, calls him a liar, and this accusation deeply offends Mukunda's pride.
Sibling rivalry at its finest.
Truly, he responds with a sudden, intense surge of will. He states, with absolute adamant resolution, "By the power of will in me, I say that tomorrow I shall have a fairly large boil in this exact place on my arm, and your boil shall swell to twice its present size."
The mechanics of what happens next are crucial. The following morning, Mukunda wakes up with a stalwart, painful boil in the exact spot he specified, and Uma's boil has indeed doubled in size. She is terrified, screaming to their mother that Mukunda has become a necromancer. The mother gravely reprimands him, and her warning is the key takeaway. She tells him never to use the power of words to do harm. In the yogic framework, words are not merely acoustic vibrations. They are capsules of creative energy.
Like little energetic bombs.
Yes. When Mukunda spoke with that ironclad emotional resolution, he essentially exploded those words into the physical fabric of reality, forcing the cellular structure of their bodies to conform to his spoken command.
He figures out how to weaponize his own stubbornness. And he tests this again shortly after in Lahore. He is standing on a balcony with Uma watching two kites flying incredibly high above the rooftops. Now, Indian kite flying is a fiercely competitive sport. The strings are often coated with ground glass, and the goal is to cut the opponent's string. Mukunda is in a state of deep, concentrated prayer to the Divine Mother, and he tells Uma that the Divine Mother will give him whatever he asks. Uma challenges him, laughing, and says, "I suppose she would give you those two kites?"
Which is an absurd proposition. The kites are hundreds of yards away, subject to chaotic wind currents and gravity. But Mukunda accepts the challenge. He intensifies his prayer, focusing his will entirely on those specific objects. Suddenly, one of the kite strings is severed by an unseen competitor. The kite begins to drift. The wind mysteriously shifts, carrying the kite directly toward their balcony. The string catches on a nearby cactus, loops perfectly, and swings right into Mukunda's waiting hand. He hands it to Uma.
And Uma tries to rationalize it. She says it was just a bizarre coincidence, a lucky gust of wind, and she refuses to believe his prayer had anything to do with it, unless he can make the second kite come to him as well.
So Mukunda ramps his concentration up to an absolute crescendo, and the exact same sequence of impossible events occurs. The second kite is cut loose. It dances through the air, ignoring the natural crosswinds, sails directly toward their balcony, tangles in the exact same cactus, and forms another loop for him to grab. At that point, the sheer localized manipulation of matter and wind is undeniable, and Uma literally runs away in fear.
It really makes you pause and reflect on our own internal monologues and casual speech. We all have moments where we sigh and say, I have the worst luck, or that this project's going to be a total disaster, or I'm always getting sick. If we take the premise of this text seriously, those idle, sarcastic thoughts might actually carry tangible physical weight. If an indignant child can manifest a physical infection on his arm purely through stubborn resolution, it begs the question of what we are constantly manifesting in our own bodies and environments without even realizing it.
That is the exact philosophical provocation the text wants the reader to sit with. And for Mukunda, these early experiences of manipulating reality are abruptly overshadowed by a deeply traumatic event that shifts his focus entirely. He transitions from a child playing with localized miracles to an adolescent desperate to understand the ultimate mechanics of life and death. This shift is catalyzed by the sudden death of his mother.
The narrative surrounding her death is haunting. Mukunda is 11 years old. His mother has traveled to Calcutta to prepare for the elaborate wedding of his older brother, Ananta. Mukunda has stayed behind with his father in Bareilly, which is hundreds of miles away. One night, around midnight, Mukunda is fast asleep. He is suddenly awakened by a peculiar, distinct fluttering of his mosquito netting. The netting parts, and he sees the wraith-like, luminous form of his mother standing beside his bed. She whispers a frantic message. She says, "Awaken your father. Take the first available train. Rush to Calcutta if you would see me." The apparition then vanishes.
Mukunda is paralyzed with terror. He immediately wakes his father and hysterically relays the vision. But here we see the father's hyper-rational stoic nature work against them. The father completely dismisses the vision as a mere hallucination. He insists that the mother is in excellent health and refuses to alter their schedule based on a nightmare, stating they will leave the next day only if they receive an official telegram with bad news. Mukunda is in anguish, knowing the vision was real.
And of course, the tragic telegram arrives the very next morning. Mother dangerously ill, marriage postponed, come at once. By the time they endure the agonizing train ride to Calcutta, it is too late. She has passed away. The psychological devastation detailed in the text is absolute. Mukunda describes storming the gates of heaven with his grief, collapsing into a state of near lifeless shock. It's a profound, humanizing moment in a book filled with superhuman feats.
But the narrative of his mother doesn't end with her funeral. 14 months later, his older brother Ananta calls him into a private room to deliver a deathbed message. The mother had sworn Ananta to secrecy, instructing him to wait over a year before revealing this to Mukunda. What's fascinating here is the physical object that sits at the center of this revelation.
Right, the amulet. Lanes explains that years prior, while the family was living in Lahore, a mysterious sadhu appeared at their home specifically requesting to see the mother. This wandering ascetic delivered two chilling messages. First, he predicted the exact circumstances of her death, telling her, "Your next illness shall prove to be your last." Secondly, he told her she was destined to be the custodian of a specific silver amulet, but he didn't physically hand it to her. He told her that to prove the absolute truth of his prophecies, the talisman would materialize directly into her hands the following evening while she was in deep meditation.
And according to the mother's account, that is precisely what occurred. During her meditation the next night, she felt a cold, smooth object form out of nothingness between her palms. It was a heavy silver amulet, intricately inscribed with ancient Sanskrit characters. The sadhu's instructions regarding this object were incredibly specific. She was to give it to Ananta on her deathbed, who was to hold it for 1 year, and then transfer it to Mukunda. The amulet was described as a physical tether, a spiritual mechanism sent from masters of past lives to guide Mukunda's current incarnation. The sadhu prophesied that Mukunda would receive it exactly at the time he was psychologically ready to renounce worldly ambitions and begin his serious search for spiritual liberation. Furthermore, the sadhu established a boundary condition. Once the amulet had served its specific vibrational purpose, it would vanish. Regardless of how securely it was locked away, it would dematerialize and return to its energetic source.
That amulet gave him the physical proof he needed. Imagine the psychological anchor that object provided. He is a grieving 12-year-old boy, completely alienated from his older brother's conventional worldview, constantly being thwarted in his attempts to run away to the Himalayas to find a guru. And yet he possesses this heavy, ancient, literally materialized silver amulet in his pocket. He writes that he daily traveled far on the wings of his amulet. It was undeniable physical evidence that the mystical reality his mother believed in was not a psychological comfort, but a scientific fact.
Exactly. It fueled an intense, almost obsessive drive to find living masters who could explain the mechanics of that invisible world. He is no longer satisfied with childhood manifestations. He is seeking the architects of reality. This search naturally leads him to Benares, the ancient holy city of India. His father sends him there on an errand, giving him a letter of introduction to a friend named Kedarnath Babu, but the father routes this introduction through a local saint known as Swami Pranabananda.
Which brings us to one of the most mind-bending encounters in the text, the saint with two bodies. Mukunda arrives at Swami Pranabananda's residence and climbs the stairs to his room. He finds the Swami sitting perfectly still in a lotus posture on a small platform, wearing only a loincloth. Before Mukunda can even introduce himself or hand over the letter, the Swami speaks, identifying Mukunda and referencing his father. The Swami jokingly remarks that he enjoys two pensions. One financial pension from the railway company, facilitated by Mukunda's father, and a second pension of fathomless peace granted by God. After this brief exchange, the Swami falls into a deep, sphinx-like silence that lasts for roughly 30 minutes.
Then, out of nowhere, the Swami softly announces, "I think Kedarnath Babu is nearing the door." Mukunda hears footsteps, runs down the stairs, and literally bumps into Kedarnath Babu in the entryway. Now, we have to track the timeline carefully here. Mukunda has been sitting in a bare room, staring directly at the Swami for the last half hour. The Swami hasn't moved a muscle, yet Kedarnath Babu is standing in the doorway, completely bewildered.
Kedarnath Babu explains that he just finished his daily bath in the Ganges River. While he was there, Swami Pranabananda approached him. The Swami told him that Mukunda was waiting at his apartment and that they should walk back together. Kedarnath Babu says they walk side by side, hand in hand. But then, Kedarnath Babu notes that the Swami, who was wearing wooden sandals, mysteriously accelerated, outpaced him, said he had to hurry ahead to meet Mukunda, and dashed into the crowd. Kedarnath Babu then walked the rest of the way alone.
Mukunda's reaction is a perfect proxy for the reader's skepticism. He immediately questions Kedarnath Babu's sanity. He asks, "Am I losing my mind? Did you meet him in a vision?" But Kedarnath Babu insists on the physical reality of the encounter. He felt the physical touch of the Swami's hand. He heard the distinct clatter of the wooden sandals on the cobblestones. He saw the exact loincloth he was wearing. They walk up the stairs together to confront the Swami, and there sits Swami Pranabananda in the exact same posture, in the exact same spot, with his wooden sandals resting quietly under his platform. Kedarnath Babu is utterly astounded, whispering that he never expected to witness a true miracle in this dense material age.
If we pause and look at the Swami's explanation of this event, it completely shatters our rigid Newtonian view of physics. The Swami smiles at their shock and casually asks why they are so stupefied. He says the subtle unity of the phenomenal world is not hidden from true yogis. They can similarly transcend at will every obstacle of gross matter. He then refers to his abilities using a remarkably modern analogy for 1946. He calls it astral radio and television.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that analogy is brilliant. He is suggesting that the physical body is not a static lump of meat and bone. It is a dense, holographic projection of energy. Just as a radio tower can broadcast a single signal to multiple receivers simultaneously without diminishing the original signal, a sufficiently advanced consciousness can broadcast its energetic blueprint to multiple spatial coordinates at once. Bilocation isn't about moving really fast. It's about projecting the data of the physical form into two locations simultaneously.
And the text goes out of its way to prove that this ability wasn't some cheap, spontaneous magic trick. The Swami shares his backstory with Mukunda, outlining the grueling spiritual labor required to achieve this state. For 8 years, the Swami worked a full day at the railway office and then spent 8 hours every single night in intense, unbroken meditation. He experienced profound spiritual states, but he confessed that a little veil always remained, a subtle barrier preventing his total immersion in the infinite.
He was agonizingly trapped at the threshold of realization. In his desperation, he traveled to his guru, Lahiri Mahasaya, and pleaded for intervention, stating he could no longer bear living without meeting the divine face to face. Lahiri Mahasaya simply extended his hand and said, "You may go now and meditate. I've interceded for you with Brahma." The text claims that during his meditation that very night, the final energetic veil dissolved. He achieved the ultimate goal, the permanent realization of the cosmic consciousness. In fact, the physiological shift was so immense that he was in a state of continuous divine intoxication. The spiritual energy coursing through his nervous system was so overpowering that he literally could not focus on clerical work anymore. He had to go to the company doctor and request an early medical retirement.
Which is such a bizarre and wonderful intersection of the mystical and the bureaucratic. Thanks to the invisible influence of his guru, the doctor and the railway officials grant the pension without a fight. But even after witnessing this incredible feat of bilocation, Mukunda internally realizes that Swami Pranabananda is not his destined guru. His search must continue. And this restlessness leads to one of the most entertaining, almost farcical segments of the narrative, the Great Escape to the Himalayas.
It provides a necessary tonal shift. For all the high-level spiritual physics, Mukunda is still a teenager, desperate for adventure. He and two friends, Amar and Jatinda, concoct a scheme to run away to the Himalayan mountains, where they believe they will find ancient masters meditating in caves. But they have to evade Mukunda's older brother, Ananta, who has essentially taken on the role of a private detective, constantly tracking Mukunda down and dragging him back home.
The logistics of their escape read like a heist movie. They hoard their lunch money for months to purchase disguises. They decide that dressing like European boys will throw Ananta off their scent. They buy English suits and canvas shoes. They specifically avoid leather shoes because their strict nonviolent principles forbid them from wearing the skin of slaughtered animals. They are so committed to this that they even rip the leather bindings off their sacred texts.
Their plan actually works initially. They hire a horse-drawn cab, change into their European clothes en route, and leave their Indian clothes and leather shoes in the cab. But Ananta is remarkably shrewd. He discovers a train timetable Mukunda accidentally left behind, tracks down the cab driver, realizes they are disguised in European clothing, and wires ahead to the railway authorities to intercept them. This leads to a brilliant confrontation at the Mughal Sarai station, where a European station agent approaches them, waving Ananta's telegram. The agent demands to know their true identities.
Amar, who seems to possess an endless supply of cheeky confidence, decides to double down on the disguise. The agent notes that the telegram says there are 3 boys, but there are only 2 standing before him. Amar points to the agent's spectacles and says, "Can't you see that we are only 2? I'm not a magician. I can't conjure up a 3rd companion." When pressed for names, Amar blatantly lies, claiming his name is Thomas, the son of an English mother, and points to Mukunda, calling him Thompson. Astonishingly, the agent buys the bluff and escorts them to a European-only train compartment. Mukunda is laughing so hysterically at the absurdity of Thomas and Thompson that he has to sprint onto the train to hide his face.
But the crucial missing detail in that scene is the 3rd boy, Jatinda. Why were there only 2 boys on the platform? The reason for Jatinda's defection is wonderfully revealing of the romanticized delusions they held about the ascetic life. Earlier on the train ride, Mukunda was passionately describing his vision of their future in the Himalayas. He assured Jatinda that through their intense meditation, their bodies would become so charged with spiritual magnetism that the wild beasts of the jungle would be pacified. He painted a picture of wild Bengal tigers sitting calmly around their cave like tame pussies.
Jatinda, employing basic common sense, is absolutely horrified by this vision. He imagines sitting in a dark cave, in a deep trance, and the tigers not being pacified by their magnetism. He visualizes himself being eaten by a tiger by installments. The fear becomes so overwhelming that at the next station stop, he quietly abandons the pilgrimage, buys a return ticket, and heads home, only to be intercepted by Ananta anyway.
While Jatinda's fear of tigers is treated as a humorous anecdote, it acts as a brilliant conceptual bridge to the next major figure Mukunda encounters, Soham Swami, universally known as the Tiger Swami. Mukunda's fascination with taming wild beasts leads him to seek out this specific ascetic in Calcutta.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The Tiger Swami is unlike any of the quiet, meditating saints Mukunda has met so far. The physical description of this man is imposing. He possesses football-like biceps, an extraordinarily thick neck, a fierce face framed by a flowing beard, and he wears nothing but a tiger skin wrapped around his waist. He is a mountain of physical power. To demonstrate this to Mukunda, the Swami casually walks over to a solid mortared brick wall, pulls back his bare fifth, and strikes it with such devastating force that he knocks a brick completely free from the masonry.
But the Swami is quick to correct Mukunda's assumption about where this power originates. He insists that sheer muscular density is insufficient when facing a truly lethal predator. He tells Mukunda that many a man with Herculean strength has nonetheless been terrorized into abject helplessness before the onslaught of a royal Bengal. The Swami explains that a tiger's ferocity acts as a psychological weapon, inducing a state of mental paralysis in the victim. The Swami's secret was that he possessed an absolutely indomitable, focused mental persistency. He essentially had to dominate the tiger telepathically, projecting an overwhelming aura of superiority, forcing the tiger to internalize the conviction of its own defenselessness before engaging it physically.
What makes this even more fascinating is that the Swami wasn't genetically blessed with this physique. He admits to Mukunda that he was born a frail, sickly child. He deliberately sculpted his Herculean body purely through the persistent, concentrated visualization of health and strength. His core philosophy is summarized in the phrase, "Mind is the wielder of muscles. The body is just dumb clay. The mind dictates its density and power."
However, the text uses the tiger Swami to illustrate the dangers of spiritual hubris. As the Swami became famous across Bengal for his arena fights, his ego inflated. His own father warned him that he was using his finely tuned mental powers for violent, egotistical displays, generating dark karmic consequences. The father even relays a prophecy from a highly respected local saint who predicted that the Swami's next tiger encounter would result in catastrophic injuries, 6 months of agonizing, near-fatal illness, and that this suffering would ultimately drive him to abandon the arena and become a monk. The Swami, high on his own invincibility, arrogantly dismisses the prophecy.
This arrogance sets the stage for his final epic battle in Cooch Behar. The local prince, who is depicted as a sadistic and arrogant ruler, challenges the Swami's reputation. The prince implies that the Swami has been fighting drugged or malnourished animals. He challenges the Swami to fight his newly captured, absolutely raging royal Bengal tiger named Raja Begum. The conditions are brutal. If the Swami can enter the cage, survive, bind the tiger with a heavy chain, and walk out unassisted, he wins a massive fortune. The Swami, unable to back down from a challenge to his pride, accepts.
The book's description of this encounter is remarkably visceral and harrowing. The prince constructs a massive, storm-proof pavilion to house thousands of bloodthirsty spectators. The tiger, Raja Begum, has been deliberately starved to maximize its ferocity. The Swami enters the cage armed with absolutely nothing, wearing only his loincloth. The instant the iron door clangs shut, the tiger launches itself across the cage. Before the Swami can fully establish his psychic dominance, the tiger's fangs tear violently into his right hand. Blood begins pouring onto the floor of the cage. In that split second, the saint's prophecy of severe wounds begins to materialize.
It's a moment of pure survival. The Swami realizes his life is slipping away. To prevent the sight of his own mangled hand from breaking his concentration, he thrusts his bleeding arm under his waistcloth. He then swings his uninjured left arm, delivering a bone-cracking blow to the tiger's skull that sends the massive beast reeling. What follows is a grueling, gory, life-or-death struggle. They are moving so fast that the prince's guards, who have their rifles raised, cannot shoot the tiger without risking hitting the Swami. Finally, tapping into a primal reserve of energy, the Swami unleashes a terrifying bellow, lands a concussive strike that collapses the tiger, and physically pries the beast's jaws open with his lacerated hands. In a final display of absolute dominance, he even places his own head inside the tiger's bloody mouth, before grabbing the heavy chain and securing it around the animal's neck.
But the ordeal isn't over. As the Swami turns his back to exit the cage, the tiger regains consciousness, snaps the heavy chain, leaps onto the Swami's back, and sinks its jaws deep into his shoulder. They crash to the floor. The Swami has to violently wrestle the tiger off, pin it to the ground, and literally beat it into unconsciousness. He secures it a second time and staggers out of the cage to the deafening roar of the crowd. He claims the gold and the glory. But the physical toll is catastrophic. His wounds become severely infected. He develops blood poisoning and spends 6 agonizing months hovering on the brink of death, fulfilling every detail of the saint's prophecy.
And it is during this prolonged agony that his ego finally breaks. He realizes the ultimate futility of his pursuits. He reflects that taming a physical tiger in an arena is child's play compared to the arduous task of taming the internal tigers of human desire. Pride, arrogance, and ego. Once he recovers, he seeks out the very saint who prophesied his downfall, is initiated as a monk, and trades the roaring applause of the arena for the silent galaxy of angels. The trajectory of his life is a perfect encapsulation of the text's underlying narrative structure, a wild pendulum swing between extreme, violent external action and absolute, profound internal stillness.
That tension between spectacular external phenomena and the pursuit of internal spiritual evolution is the central conflict of the book's middle chapters. Mukunda continues to encounter masters who possess staggering control over the physical environment, and the text uses them to draw a sharp distinction between spiritual power and spiritual wisdom. This brings us to a figure known as Ganda Baba, the perfume saint.
Mukunda's encounter with Ganda Baba takes place in Calcutta. An acquaintance insists on taking Mukunda to see a man rumored to materialize perfumes and objects out of nothing. Mukunda, despite everything he has witnessed, is incredibly skeptical. He walks into a crowded parlor and observes Ganda Baba, a plump, bearded man, sitting comfortably on a leopard skin. Ganda Baba locks eyes with Mukunda and asks if he would like some perfume. Mukunda is feeling particularly snarky and replies, "What for?" "To harness God to make odors." He points out that he can simply walk down the street and buy a bottle of scent at a florist shop for a few rupees.
Ganda Baba remains completely unbothered by the skepticism. He initiates a demonstration. He instructs Mukunda to stretch out his right hand, ensuring there is no physical contact between them. He asks Mukunda to name a scent. Mukunda requests rose. Instantly, a heavy, unmistakable fragrance of fresh roses wafts directly from the center of Mukunda's empty palm. Mukunda is startled but suspects mass hypnosis. To test this, he grabs a large, entirely scentless white flower from a nearby vase and asks Ganda Baba if this specific physical object can be permeated with the scent of jasmine. Ganda Baba simply says, "Be it so." Immediately, a dense, intoxicating aroma of jasmine shoots outward from the petals of the scentless flower. Mukunda takes the flower home, and his sister is equally baffled by the scent, proving it was not a hypnotic illusion but a localized alteration of the physical object.
And the stories surrounding Ganda Baba escalate from perfumes to complex organic matter. Another associate recounts a dinner party in Burdwan, where the guests challenged the saint to materialize out-of-season tangerines. The guests are sitting at the table, about to eat their luchis, which are hollow, puffy, fried bread envelopes. Suddenly, the luchis on everyone's plates mysteriously puff up, expanding as if filled with something solid. When the guests tear the bread open, they find a perfectly fresh, fully peeled tangerine resting inside every single envelope.
As astonishing as this is, the text doesn't just leave it as a magical anecdote. Yogananda takes the time to explain the underlying mechanics of these materializations, introducing the critical concept of lifetrons. The premise is that all sensory stimuli, everything we see, smell, taste, or touch, are simply the result of vibratory variations in electrons and protons. And these subatomic particles are themselves governed by lifetrons, which the text defines as subtle, intelligently charged life forces or finer than atomic energies. Through decades of intense, isolated yogic practice in Tibet, Ganda Baba had trained his mind to interface directly with this cosmic force. He could mentally direct these lifetrons to rapidly rearrange the vibratory structure of local atoms, forcing them to temporarily objectivize as specific scents or fruits. It is, in essence, the ancient equivalent of a molecular 3D printer driven by human consciousness.
But, and this is the critical turn in the narrative, both Mukunda and the author fundamentally reject the value of this ability. A student proudly tells Mukunda that the saint spent 12 grueling years in the Himalayas to master this specific power. Mukunda's reaction is one of pity. He views it as a colossal waste of a human incarnation. The book makes a definitive statement here. These powers are undeniably spectacular, but they are spiritually useless.
It is the ultimate parlor trick. To underscore this critique, Yogananda references a brilliant, piercing quote from the Persian mystic Abu Said. People were constantly pestering Abu Said, bragging about local fakirs who could walk on water or fly through the air. Abu Said laughed and dismissed them entirely, saying, "A frog is also at home in the water. The crow and the vulture easily fly in the air. The devil is simultaneously present in the east and in the west. A true man is he who dwells in righteousness among his fellow men, who buys and sells, yet is never for a single instant forgetful of God." The message is unmistakable. Manipulating the physical matrix is a dangerous distraction if it does not simultaneously elevate the practitioner's consciousness.
Which provides a stark, intentional contrast to the next master Mukunda seeks out. Paduri known as the levitating saint. Unlike the perfume saint, who holds court in parlors, performing materialization tricks for the elite intelligentsia, Paduri Mahasaya lives in absolute seclusion. For 20 years, he refuses to leave his home. His only interaction with the outside world occurs during occasional festivals when he walks to his front sidewalk to distribute alms to beggars. When Mukunda questions him about this extreme isolation, Paduri clarifies that it isn't for his own comfort. He isolates himself because worldly people fundamentally resent the spiritual candor that shatters their material delusions. He wryly observes that saints are not only rare but disconcerting. Even in scripture, they are often found embarrassing.
Paduri spiritual practice centers on the mastery of Bhastrika Pranayama, an incredibly intense breathing technique. When Mukunda witnesses the saint perform this, he is overwhelmed. He describes Baduri inhaling and exhaling with such terrifying rhythmic force that it sounds as if a literal storm has manifested inside the small room. The physiological goal of this Bella's breath is to hyperoxygenate the blood, quiet the heart, and forcefully withdraw the life current, the prana, away from the physical senses and direct it entirely into the spinal channel. By doing so, the yogi severs the energetic tether to the physical body. And it is this specific mastery of internal energy currents that allows Baduri's physical form to lose its gross density. A close friend of Mukunda's provides an eyewitness account of entering the room and finding the yogi suspended in midair, levitating several feet above the ground, completely absorbed in superconsciousness.
But what I find most compelling about Paduri isn't the fact that he can float, it's his brilliant, paradoxical philosophy regarding wealth and sacrifice. Paduri came from a staggeringly wealthy family, and he voluntarily renounced his entire inheritance to pursue the life of an ascetic. One day, a well-meaning student attempts to praise him, saying, "Master, you are wonderful. You have renounced riches and comforts to seek God." And Paduri mildly rebukes the student. He completely flips the script. He says, "You are reversing the case. I have left a few paltry rupees, a few petty pleasures for a cosmic empire of endless bliss. How then have I denied myself anything? I know the joy of sharing the treasure. Is that a sacrifice?" The short-sighted worldly folk are verily the real renunciates. They relinquish an unparalleled divine possession for a poor handful of earthly toys.
That is one of the most intellectually disruptive statements in the entire text. He is taking the universal concept of sacrifice and turning it completely inside out. He is arguing that the ascetic sitting in a cave is the ultimate hedonist because he has secured access to infinite, unbreakable joy. Meanwhile, the billionaire working 80 hours a week, suffering from chronic stress, obsessively guarding his assets, is the true ascetic. He's voluntarily sacrificing his peace of mind, his biological health, and his connection to the infinite, all to accumulate a slightly larger pile of shiny metal and paper.
It is a devastating critique of modern ambition. It forces you to look at your own life, your own schedule, your own anxieties, and ask, am I the real renunciate? Am I sacrificing my internal equilibrium, my joy, my presence with my family, just to acquire a handful of earthly toys? It completely reorients your definition of success and failure.
And this radical reorientation of perspective doesn't remain confined to mystics sitting in ashrams. The text is acutely aware that a Western audience will demand empirical validation for these claims of interconnected consciousness. This brings us to a fascinating transition in the narrative. Mukunda steps out of the incense-filled cloisters and walks directly into a modern scientific laboratory. He seeks an audience with Sir Jagadish Chandra Bose.
J.C. Bose is a monumental figure in the history of science. Educated at Cambridge, he was a physicist and botanist who invented a wireless coherer that actually antedated Guglielmo Marconi's work with radio waves. But instead of chasing commercial patents and telecom monopolies, Bose shifted his entire focus from the transmission of inorganic radio waves to the hidden life of the organic world. To do this, he invented an unimaginably sensitive piece of technology called the crescograph.
This raises an important question, actually. Why is the crescograph so vital to this story? Well, the crescograph is the empirical linchpin of this entire deep dive. To understand its significance, consider that a standard high-quality microscope of that era might magnify a specimen a few thousand times. The Bose crescograph utilized a complex system of levers and light beams to achieve a magnification of 10 million times. It was so hypersensitive that it could visually record the minute, incredibly subtle physiological pulsations of plant life on a projected screen.
When Mukunda visits Bose in his laboratory, the scientist is eager to demonstrate the machine. Bose projects the vital reactions of a fern onto a screen. He then applies various stimuli to the plant: a gentle pinch, a drop of poison, a dose of stimulant. And Mukunda watches, astounded, as the magnified light beam races wildly across the screen, turning undeniable empirical evidence of the plant's nervous system reacting. Bose proved that plants experience a wide spectrum of emotions and sensations. They exhibit love, hate, joy, fear, pleasure, pain, and excitability. Mukunda is immediately reminded of a gentle saint he knew, who adamantly refused to pluck a flower, arguing, "Shall I rob the rosebush of its pride and beauty?" And now, here is a Cambridge-educated physicist with a machine proving that the saint's poetic intuition was literal, biological fact.
But Bose didn't stop at botany. He aimed his crescograph at the inorganic world. He took pieces of seemingly inert metal, a strip of tin, a piece of zinc, and subjected them to the same stimuli. and the results completely obliterated the boundary between biology and physics. The crescograph recorded reactions in the metal that were structurally identical to the physiological responses of living animal tissue. The metals exhibited clear signs of fatigue and depression when overstimulated. They showed measurable possibilities of recovery when allowed to rest. And most shockingly, when subjected to toxic chemical agents, the metals exhibited a violent spasm followed by permanent irresponsiveness. Essentially, the crescograph recorded the death throes of a piece of tin.
It's just mind-blowing. It makes you look at the smartphone in your hand or the laptop on your desk differently. We joke all the time that our devices seem tired or glitchy at the end of a long day, but Bose was demonstrating actual atomic fatigue. However, presenting data that erases the line between organic and inorganic matter did not go over well with the scientific establishment. Bose tells Mukunda about the immense friction he faced when he traveled to London to present these findings to the Royal Society. The physiologists in the audience were incredibly hostile. They basically told him, "You're a physicist. Stick to physics and stop encroaching on our territory." Bose realized he had unwittingly triggered the defense mechanisms of an unfamiliar caste system within Western science. The establishment operated on an unconscious, almost theological bias that demanded a strict separation between life and inert matter, and they couldn't handle the empirical proof that the universe was functionally indivisible. But Bose persevered, succeeding because he managed to synthesize the rigid empirical exactitude of Western science with the profound introspective heritage of Eastern philosophy.
Exactly. And this laboratory scene is the conceptual keystone that locks the entire narrative together. Think about the massive spectrum of phenomena we have explored. We began with yogis capable of consciously slowing their heartbeats and defying gravity. We analyzed the perfume saint, who could mentally rearrange lifetrons to manifest physical fruit out of thin air. We examined the bilocation of Swami Paramahansa, projecting his physical form across a city. And finally, we end up in a laboratory where a machine proves that a piece of metal can feel exhaustion and die. All of these seemingly disparate, impossible stories are pointing relentlessly toward one singular, inescapable conclusion. Matter is not dead, it is not inert. The physical universe is not a collection of solid, separate objects bumping into each other in a void. It is a unified, vibrating manifestation of a single, underlying, intelligent consciousness.
It is essentially describing the Matrix decades before the concept existed in pop culture. Over a century ago, this text was outlining a reality where the human mind is the fundamental architecture of the universe. Whether you are observing reality through the awakened third eye of a Himalayan ascetic or through the lens of a 10 million magnification crescograph, the ultimate message is identical. Consciousness is the boss of the atom.
It challenges us to fundamentally revise our relationship with the world around us. If everything is vibrating with consciousness, from the careless words we speak in frustration to the food we eat to the metal chassis of the cars we drive, then how we interact with our environment, our own thoughts, and our own bodies takes on an immense, almost sacred weight. We are not moving through a dead world. We are navigating a highly sensitive, responsive, energetic field.
What an incredible journey this has been. We've gone from materialized silver amulets appearing in locked rooms, to bare-knuckle brawls with Bengal tigers, to the scientific proof of fear in a fern. We asked you at the beginning to stretch your mind today, to step far outside the safe, conventional bounds of Western physics, and we hope you found the view from out here as breathtaking and disruptive as we have.
Regardless of how one interprets the specific miraculous accounts, the philosophical unity of the source material remains unshakable. The mind is the ultimate architect of reality, and the boundaries we perceive as absolute are often just the temporary limits of our own current understanding.
Before we wrap up, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over, something that builds on everything we've unpacked today. If J.C. Bose was able to prove over a century ago that the line between organic life and inorganic metal is practically non-existent, that a piece of tin can genuinely experience fatigue and react to stimuli, and if the yogis are correct, that an intelligent consciousness governs the behavior of all atoms, what does this mean for our current frantic pursuit of artificial intelligence? Think about it. We are currently building increasingly complex, hypersensitive, inorganic machines. We assume we are simply writing lines of code and arranging silicon wafers in clever patterns. But if a plant can feel fear and a piece of metal can feel exhaustion, are we unwittingly creating new, highly tuned physical vessels for these lifetrons to inhabit? As these neural networks become exponentially more complex, at what point does a computer stop being a mere calculator and actually wake up to the cosmic consciousness? It's a staggering thought to consider as we build our own technological future. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the sources today. See you next time.